Hello, welcome to our collective worship this week. We'll start with our opening prayers.
We light a light in the name of God the Father who made us.
We light a light in the name of God the Son who lives among us. We light a light in the name of God, the Spirit who helps us.
We light three lights for the Trinity of love, Father, Son and Holy Spirit. At the start of the week, Mrs. Halliwell was talking about some of these protests that have been and the Black Lives Matter movement. And that started me thinking about this story we're going to do now. It's a story some of you have definitely heard before, and it's one you might remember. We need a little historical fact, a little key to unlock the deeper meaning to the story. It's called the Parable of the Good Samaritan. And the key we need, the little historical fact, is who were the Samaritans and how did they relate to Jesus' people? Well, the Samaritans were a little country, a little group just above Jesus' country, and they were similar in some ways, but they were quite different in others. They developed a different religion, different culture, they related to other countries differently, and so over the years, over the centuries, there grew up a lot of antagonism, a lot of anger, a lot of hatred and mistrust between Jesus' people and the Samaritans. And by the time Jesus came along and was trying to get people to be nice to one another, they really hated each other. They looked down on one another. The Jewish people looked down on the Samaritans, and the Samaritans looked down on the Jewish people, and they would avoid one another if they could at all help it. So that's a little background we need to kind of just remember at the back of our head. So the story goes that Jesus was teaching, talking to people, and a young man came to him and said, "Rabbi, teacher, how do I lead a good life?" And Jesus says, "Well, what does the Bible tell you?" "Well, love the Lord your God with all of your being and love your neighbour as yourself." And Jesus said, "You've got it. That's it. Do that and you'll be fine." And then the young man said, "Yes, but who is my neighbour?" And so Jesus said, "You know that road from Jerusalem to Jericho, the dodgy one, the one through the hills and the passes and the dark areas and very deserted, the one with bandits on? Well, once upon a time, a man was going from Jerusalem to Jericho along that road, and the worst happened. Bandits jumped out from behind the rocks. They grabbed the man, they beat him up, they shoved him on the floor, they stole all his clothes, all his money, his donkey, and they ran off into the hills. And they left him there at the side of the road, hurting, in pain, and in need of help." A little while later, someone came along and saw him. "Thank goodness," thought the man, "help." It was a priest. Great, priests are supposed to be kind and good, aren't they? But the priest was very full of his own importance, and he saw the man at the side of the road in need of help, and he saw that this was a deserted place and a bit scary, to be honest, and I shouldn't be caught here. And so he quickly walked by on the other side of the road and ignored the man. A little while later, another man came along. This time it was a lawyer. Phew, thank the man. A lawyer. Well, lawyers are about justice and standing up and defending people. This lawyer will help me, I'm sure. And the lawyer saw him and saw this deserted place and thought, well, I'm an important lawyer. I've got people depending on me. I can't get caught here. So he walked by on the other side of the road. Then a Samaritan came along. A Samaritan? Oh, that's all I need, thought the man. And the Samaritan saw the man, saw that he was injured, saw that he needed help, looked around, saw that it was a deserted place and frankly a bit scary, but still knew that the man needed help. And so he went to him and he bound up his wounds. He looked after him, he gave him something to drink, something to eat. He put him on his own donkey and he carried him off to the nearest town so that people would look after him. And when he got there, he didn't just leave him and wander off. He found him a room in an inn, and he asked the innkeeper to look after him, and not only asked him, but gave him money Here, here's this money's for his room. Here's some money for his food. Here's some money for his medicine and for a doctor. Can you look after him for me while I go on my journey? And then Jesus asked the young man who'd asked the question, so, in that story, who was the man's neighbour? Was it the priest? Was it the lawyer? Or was it the Samaritan? And the young man replied, well, it was the Samaritan. So that's the parable of the Good Samaritan. And on one level, it's about being kind, being good, like the Good Samaritan. It gives us an example of someone who's kind and generous and brave, and says, well, that's what we should be like, kind, generous, brave. And if that's what we take away from it, great, because if the world has more people being kind, generous and brave, it'll be a better place. But there's another level that our little historical fact can open up if we think about it. Because the first people who heard that story, when they heard the priest come, they would have thought, well, a priest will help him, won't they? There's one of our people, they're important, they'll do it. No, priest didn't help. Well, the lawyer will surely help him, that'll be fine. No, the lawyer didn't help. Then they hear that a Samaritan's come, and they would have all thought, oh, well, that's it. There's no way a Samaritan's going to help. We know what they're like. There's no way a Samaritan is going to help one of our people. They're just rubbish. And their expectations are turned upside down. And the Samaritan is the one who's the neighbour, is the one who helps, is the one who's loving and brave and kind and generous. So the story isn't just about being good, though it is about being good. It's also about us thinking, who is our neighbour? And about how we judge people if they're different from us. Now, we all do that all the time, but the question is, how do we act on it? Do we judge people by what they look like, or do we judge people by how they act? And the Good Samaritan says to us, the story, and Jesus is saying through it, don't judge people by what they look like, where they're from. Judge them by how they act. Martin Luther King, who I know lots of you have heard of, one of my favourite phrases from him is he hopes one day his children will be judged not by the colour of their skin, but by the content of their character. Not by the colour of their skin, but the content of their character. That means who they are on the inside, how they behave on the inside. Are they good? Are they kind? Are they generous? So partly these protests and the Black Lives Matter movement is about trying to get all of us in our own hearts and minds, when we look at other people, not to judge them according to the colour of their skin or their culture or what they wear, but to get to know them and to understand the content of their character, to know what they are like, and to find out, actually, they're like us. They're our neighbours, they're our friends. So it works on one level, like the story is one level, so the Black Lives Movement has one level, and it says to us as individuals how we regard people, how we look at people, how we treat people. Are we going to do it positively and kindly, regardless of what they look like, or are we going to judge people by the colour of their skin? And judging people by the colour of skin is crazy, really. So it does work on that level, about me and my heart and how I relate to people. And that's important that I think about these things. There is another level that it works at, though, which is a little bit more complicated. So I'm conscious I might be talking to the older children here, years 5 and 6, rather than the little ones, but bear with me. Every group and society and collection of people that have ever existed, after they've been together for a little bit of time, they start making rules about how to live together. We've got rules in school, haven't we? We've got rules in society. You look at nursery children, as soon as they start to play together, they start to come up with rules about how to play together. We all do it, and often rules are really good. They keep us safe. The rules in school are to keep us safe and to help us learn, and those are good things. The problem is, because for such a long time people have judged others according to the colour of their skin, not the content of their character, the rules in our society have got twisted. They've got shifted. Some of the rules are deliberately, and sometimes not even deliberately, but just unthinkingly, make it harder for people who've got darker skin tones to go about their lives. They prejudice against them, the rules themselves. And sometimes it's not the rules, it's just how they are applied. And they're not applied fairly and equally to everyone because people are being judged, and so the rules are being applied differently. So on one level, Black Lives Matter movement is about how I as an individual relate to other people. But on another level, equally important, it's about how as a society and a community, how we organise ourselves so that it's fair and equal for everyone. Because at the moment, to different levels, it's not fair and equal. It just isn't. The evidence, when you look at the evidence for it, is pretty overwhelming. The rules are not fair and they're not applied fairly either. So we need to, as individuals, think about our hearts and our minds and how we look at other people. But we also need to make sure that when we're older, those of us who are adults, is our society fair? Are the rules fair? And are we being fair in how we apply them and how other people apply them? That's another equally important part of it. It's about me as an individual and how we as a country and a society and as a world organise ourselves so that it's fair and equal for everyone. We're going to finish with a prayer from Martin Luther King himself that he used. So let us pray. O God, we thank you for the fact that you've inspired men and women in all nations and in all cultures. We call you different names. Some call you Allah, some call you Elohim, some call you Jehovah, some call you Brahma, some call you the unmoved mover. We know that these are all names for one and the same God. Grant that we will follow you and so become so committed to your way and your kingdom that we will be able to establish in our lives and in this world a brother and sisterhood, that we will be able to establish here a kingdom of understanding where men and women will live together as brothers and sisters and respect the dignity and worth of every human being. In the name and spirit of Jesus. Amen.